Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. My name is Steve Gregorian. I'm the president and CEO of the Detroit Economic Club. Welcome to today's meeting, and I especially want to welcome our DEC members. If you're not a DEC member yet, please give me 10 seconds to myth bust. There's no nomination, no application, and no job level requirement for becoming a Detroit Economic Club member. We're simply looking for people that want to build their networks and learn from thought leaders like the ones we have on stage today. So you can sign up when you get back to your office, econclub.org. As we get started, I would ask you to just kindly silence your cell phone so we do not disturb today's program. And one of the many traditions at DEC meetings is we always begin by honoring our country with the Pledge of Allegiance. I would just ask you to stand and join me, and the flag is to my right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And kindly remain standing as our invocation today will be delivered by Deacon Joseph Adams from the Hartford Memorial Baptist Church.
Let me first wish you a very prosperous and happy new year. Now, shall we pray? Almighty God, we ask in our prayer today for an inspired love for each and every one of us, a love that will overcome greed, which sets the stage for corruption as we do business with one another, love that will fill the air and change our communities. We want to be unified as we go forward this year. We want to be all together. We want to thank the Detroit Economic Club and its leadership for moving in this direction by allowing a new group called the Young Leaders, which is a very diverse group of young men and women that will eventually take leadership in our community. We must also continue to protect and strengthen our rule of law, starting in our homes, teaching our children that all men are created equal. We ask these many blessings from you who have created us all. Amen.
Thank you, Deacon Adams. Please be seated. A really quick but important thank you to Detroit Public Television and Lawrence Technological University for partnering with us on today's webcast. And of course, if you're here with us often, you know we love having high school and college students with us at every one of our DEC meetings. Today is no exception. Courtesy of our generous corporate sponsors, 70 high school and college students today got to start their day with a private reception with Jeff and Diane. And I want to just take a minute to recognize those students who are with us today. I would just ask you to hold your applause till the very end. So, of course, near and dear to my heart, my alma mater, we've got two groups all the way from Albion College. One group sponsored by Simon and the great folks at ITC Holdings. The other group by Diane and Jim Tisch from Grant Thornton. Chelsea High School is with us, also compliments of Diane Swonk and Jim Tisch. Thank you, Grant Thornton. Schoolcraft College, compliments of Baker Tilly. Southfield A&T, thanks to Jeff Gallinger and Butzel Long. Martin Luther King Junior High School, thank you to AAA. And the Warriors from Brother Rice High School, thanks to Kaylee Vanderbush and the General Motors Company. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a round of applause as we welcome these students and thank their sponsors. And a quick word, I'm from Albion, a quick word about the Albion students. You've got 18 students, 3 instructors here from the Gerald Ford Institute for Leadership. It's the Ford Public Policy School at Albion College. Their semester does not begin until this coming Monday, but they're here in Detroit doing a deep dive this week. They're meeting with business leaders. They're learning about the progress the city is making, but also how leaders are tackling some of the issues. And I did have the honor and pleasure of being invited to a dinner with them last night at the Grosse Pointe War Memorial. Ladies and gentlemen, I can tell you our future is in very good hands, so please join me in thanking Albion College for making their trip here to Detroit, spending time with us. Okay, quickly on your table, sponsor brochure. Take a moment to look at that, patronize those businesses. They're the reason we're here today. Thank you if you're one of those sponsored members. Also on your table is our seasonal lineup. I hope you have a ticket for next Monday, January 13th, because we are sold out. We're hosting Steve Forbes, a very provocative program. Can the U.S. economy survive the 2020 election? And for goodness sake, let's hope the answer is a resounding yes. January 15th, another one of our professional development breakfast seminars. You'll learn how to lead change across your organization. And just announced late last week, January 28th, we're honored to be joined by the Michigan Supreme Court Chief Justice Bridget Mary McCormick, along with Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist. They'll be talking about jobs and justice. And we love technology. Today, we're piloting a way for DEC members to use technology to help build your network. I hope you've taken a minute to download the Plain Sight app and check in at this meeting. With this app, you will see skills and interests of the people around you in real time, and you just never know. Your next hire, your next contract resource might be just a few feet away. So check it out. Let us know what you think in this pilot phase. If you're a tweeter, we want you to tweet today using @DebtEconomicClub. And one of the more popular elements of our meetings is we want to hear from you in the final 15 minutes. You'll have a chance to ask questions of our panelists. You can do that with your smartphone. Instructions are on your table. And those questions will make their way now to our presiding officer, who I'm about to put to work. Jim Tisch is the office managing partner of Grant Thornton. He is a board member and a great friend of the DEC and a huge supporter of many, many things in our community. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jim Tisch.
Thank you, Steve, and good afternoon, DEC members and guests. It's my privilege to introduce today's roundtable. Diane Swonk is Chief Economist at Grant Thornton and a widely respected macroeconomist who maintains a unique perspective on the inner workings of Main Street as well as Wall Street. Diane is an expert on the economics of labor market, monetary policy, and structural changes that are distinct from economic cycles. Diane has been named a Fellow of the National Association for Business Economics. She also sits on multiple other committees and councils. Diane earned her BA and MA in economics from the University of Michigan. Go Blue. She also received an MBA in finance from the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. Diane? Jeff Donofrio is the Director of the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity for the state of Michigan. Jeff is charged with coordinating the state's workforce and economic development programs to meet business and labor needs and grow communities where all Michiganders have great equal opportunities to reach their fullest potential. Previously, Jeff worked as the Executive Director of Workforce Development for the City of Detroit. He also worked for Ford Motor Company and a variety of elected officials, including Congressman John Dingell, Congressman Sandy Levin, and Governor Jennifer Granholm. Jeff earned his BA in Public Policy and Secondary Education from Michigan State University and his MBA from Georgetown University. Jeff? And our moderator today is a familiar face to all. Daniel Howes is a columnist and associate business editor at the Detroit News. Daniel has reported from nearly 25 countries on 3 continents and in the Middle East. He's a frequent contributor to News Talk 760 WJR in Detroit and a weekly contributor to Michigan Radio in Ann Arbor. He has won many awards over the years for his work. Daniel holds a bachelor's degree in history from the College of Worcester in Ohio and a master's in international affairs from Columbia University. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm Detroit Economic Club welcome to Daniel. and to our roundtable. This past November and December, many of you participated in the 8th Annual Michigan Economic Outlook Survey. This survey was authored by the Baker Strategy Group, along with partnering firms CFI Group and Logic Solutions. Here to unveil some key survey results is Baker Strategy Group Managing Partner David Baker.
Thank you, Jim, and happy 2020 to all. We're delighted to be here to present the results of the 8th Annual Michigan Economic Outlook Survey. This program began in 2013 as an effort to gauge economic health of our state by gathering feedback from Michiganders with one central theme: to make Michigan a great place to start and grow a business. Special thanks are due to Steve Gregorian and the Detroit Economic Club, supporters of this program since its inception. Thanks also to Sherry Petrus and David Ham with CFI Group, Jimmy Shao with Logic Solutions for their close collaboration, and thanks also for Larry Eiler, Don Hart, Diane Keller, and Dr. Matt Brown. We'd also like to thank the 589 chambers, business associations, economic development groups who have helped us collect over 18,000 responses over this eight-year period. For 2020, we had 111 participating associations generating 1,153 responses across 472 cities and 59 states and provinces. Today, we will focus on the 295 responses from Michigan from all three sectors: business, nonprofit, and government. Michigan's population is roughly 10 million, with a labor force of 5 million and 4.8 of whom are employed, giving Michigan a low 4% unemployment rate. Michigan's GDP is approximately 540 billion, putting per capita GDP around 54,000. The Michigan workforce sector breakdown is similar to the distribution of surveys responses for Michigan, though nonprofit employees are slightly oversampled. For timing, survey begins 1 week after Election Day to allow some of the political dust to settle. This year, elections were on November 5th, so the survey ran November 12th to December 20th, with results available today. And for measurement, we borrow an approach used by Ann Arbor-based consulting firm CFI Group, co-founder of the American Customer Satisfaction Index. CFI Group asks questions on a 1 to 10 scale for greater measurement precision and then translates the results to 0 to 100 to generate a score. These scores are what we use today to report the results. Michigan respondents say the organization outlook for 2020 looks strong. The 12-month outlook is 81, up 2 points from last year's 4-point dip, and the second highest score we've seen since 2013. Michigan generally runs 2 to 4 points above the U.S. average and continues to be 2 points above the aggregate. Michigan respondents also say they are more likely to recommend Michigan as a great place to grow a business. Michigan scores are back up 4 points after falling by 5 last year. Meanwhile, the average respondent score across the U.S. actually slid 2 points. Yet, despite a positive 12-month outlook and a willingness to recommend Michigan, respondents still give Michigan only a modest 69 for being business-friendly, down from a high 2 years ago. But much of Michigan's economy is driven by local and regional activity. Here we see the 10 prosperity regions created in 2014 to help formalize collaborative relationships among local and regional partners. At the regional level, there are 4 measures worth noting in 2020. First, Michigan respondents are more likely than ever to recommend their region as a great place to grow a business. The likelihood to recommend score for economic regions in Michigan is up 4 points from 2019. Second, respondents say their region has a forward-looking culture that embraces entrepreneurialism. This score is at a 5-year high. Regions that embrace entrepreneurialism provide a healthy environment where startups and businesses can thrive. And third, new and growing enterprises require an available talent pool to thrive. Skilled, educated talent available for hire continues to be low. Efforts dedicated to addressing talent availability in Michigan must continue. And fourth, respondents say the education system in their region leaves something to be desired. This is the only measure that consistently scores below U.S. average. Continued efforts to improve education system in our regions are clearly needed. Overall, respondents highlight some positive elements. Organizational outlook is up, likelihood to recommend Michigan increased, and people generally feel that Michigan is a great state for growing a business, raising a family, and living as a young professional. The questions that remain are familiar topics: an education system that needs repair, and a lack of available talent for hire. And of course, Michigan's failing infrastructure and roads. Many respondents mentioned the need to fix the roads in the survey comment section. And now I'll hand this program over to Daniel Howe and the esteemed panel for their insights for Michigan in 2020. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it very much. What hit you about the survey?
For me?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I guess for me, the interesting thing is where Michigan is relative to the rest of the country on educational attainment for K through 12. I mean, this is one of the key issues. And having grown up in Michigan, I grew up here and I was dyslexic, severely dyslexic. I happened to serendipitously, because of the educational system that I stumbled into, do very well by accident. But it really meant something to me that I had such a great education, and to see Michigan lagging as an economist, that's something that just breaks my heart.
Is this understood nationally, do you think?
I think everyone, you know, how many people have not run on an educational platform at the national level? But one of the things that people don't realize is it's not national. All education is state and local, and it's funded by real estate taxes. And so the crisis, which was inherently a real estate crisis, not only have we had 4 decades of cuts to public education, we've also had a real estate crisis that shrunk the pool of available funds for public schooling. Mm-hmm. And it exacerbated the differences between the haves and the have-not communities, where you have a great school in a very wealthy suburb where they can pay more taxes versus a not so great school. Chicago, where I'm at now, has the same kinds of issues. And that tension is something that we really can't solve at the federal level. And that's one of the key issues. And the problem is it's something we can't let go. This is our future. I mean, this is something that, it drives me crazy when I see it, because I work with a lot of kids from some of the worst neighborhoods in the country who do the most incredible things. And human capital is malleable. It's, you know, what I specialize in as a labor economist, knowing that we're throwing away and casting aside so much of our potential. And we're going to need it even more as we all grow old.
Well, and it's harder to produce.
Rely on them to pay for us.
It's harder to produce talent. I mean, that's the other side of the coin, right, Jeff? I mean, you know, talent comes from somewhere. It either comes from outside the state or you produce it. Right. And if the educational system is not producing it, you're not going to have the talent. And that's kind of reflected in the survey, I think. You know, it's a little bit better, but there seems to still be concerns that there's not available talent. Number one, do you agree with that observation? And secondly, what is the current administration trying to do to address that? I know that Governor Snyder had a lot of things that they were trying to do to address that problem. This has been a problem for some period of time.
Yeah, and I think you see that at a state level, and Diane's point is really important about the funding or the lack of funding for K through 12 in particular. You know, we're about middle of the pack in terms of states, in terms of funding, and we're about middle of the pack in terms of outcomes. But what is really concerning is that before this governor's budget increased educational levels a bit in terms of per pupil funding, we were one of 2 states that had actually decreased in funding. We in West Virginia. That's not a club that we necessarily want to be associated with.
No.
So that's a real problem for us, and that's a problem for our trajectory, right? Because if we believe that getting out of the middle of the pack, or hopefully not even moving further back, is important, we've got to have the funding that's going to make that happen. We also have to have big goals, right? We have to have big goals of post-secondary education. And that's why the governor put in place the 60% goal of having 60% of our adults in Michigan have a post-secondary credential by 2030. We know that jobs are going to require it. We know that there's a huge skills gap in terms of, you know, the supply-demand curves have flipped. There are more people today, or there are fewer people today that are looking for jobs than jobs that are posted. That's not been the case for the last 20 years in Michigan. So we have to have that skills gap closed. We have to make sure that more people are getting those post-secondary degrees, certificates, high-quality certificates. They're going into apprenticeship programs. They're going to associate's degree programs, very heavily weighted at our community college friends, but also the 4-year paths as well. That's what's going to put us on the map. And it's a competitive issue, too, because think about who we're competing against in this country. Let's say Kentucky and Tennessee. Kentucky and Tennessee were states that were behind us in post-secondary degrees. Kentucky's overtaken us, and Tennessee has closed the gap to 2%. And they've done that because they've set big goals, and they've also put programs in place, the Tennessee Reconnect, the Promise in both states, that help provide tuition-free paths to college for individuals. And this isn't just about the individual, it's about the competitiveness of this state. It's about the state's future and economy. So we've got to focus on those things as well.
Do you really think this is, in previous discussions about this, it's become somewhat clear, I think, that Michigan is not that it's getting worse, it's that it's not improving and others are improving at a faster rate. That's right. Would you agree with that?
So, you know, Kentucky's rate of growth and Tennessee's rate of growth in terms of post-secondary credentials, 3% in the last few years. Michigan was half of that. So we are not even just keeping pace. And we are going to lose out if we do not find the ways to help more people achieve those educational goals. And part of that, too, are the interventions that we have to have, those barrier removals. Because we know we need mass transit. We know we need childcare. We know we need other things that help people actually get to school, stay in school, and be able to get jobs and keep them over the long term.
Diane, the survey, I think, fairly optimistic tone. How does that square with surveys of CEOs done by the Business Roundtable, by the Conference Board, on a more national level in terms of what they see coming in 2020?
Well, it's something that I actually put back to Dave when he first presented some of the results. The national surveys on CEO surveys are actually in recession territory. They improved a little bit in the fourth quarter, but stayed below 50%. The number of people on the Business Roundtable that Jamie Dimon runs now, out of Washington, the majority of businesses said they're either going to hold the line on hiring or decline or drop their hiring for 2020, which is not the kind of optimism I want to see going into 2020. And you sort of look at this dissonance between the consumer confidence surveys and these surveys here, which not as much C-suite individuals, and you wonder, what are CEOs seeing that we're not seeing?
Well, there's the question.
Right, and what I think there is there's a multitude of issues. One is most CEOs have to deal with the world multinationally. The trade wars have been costly for them. It's been costly for the state of Michigan. Tariffs matter, and whatever you think of China, they cheat. They need to be, we need to deal with them in a different way. Dealing it on a bilateral basis may not be the best way, and there may be things that we're losing in the equation. And I deal with a lot of our clients in the middle market that just get caught in the middle of this. And the situation, the phase one skinny deal with China that we hope to get signed on January 15th really just rolls back the retaliation that China had done on our farmers and things like that, many of which have now gone bankrupt, and they're gone. The rural communities also lost the banks that go with them. They've rolled back some of that, but they don't roll back a lot of the tariffs. In fact, 3/4 of the tariffs that have been initiated over the last 2 years are in place right now with China. 3/4 of all goods coming in from China are tariffed at this point in time. And they don't play fair. We don't like what they do, but there's a void out there and they're moving beyond us, and that's a problem too.
So you think the CEOs are looking at this and saying that this is an intractable, that this is moving in the wrong direction?
CEOs are seeing what I'm seeing, and for the first time ever as an economist. It used to be, I always kept my politics separate from my economics because they're two different things. And I always thought policy was really important.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. There's no delineation. But what's hard is, it used to be easy to be an economist because you just looked at the fundamentals and you said, oh, that's what's going to happen. Now we've actually had periods where people got scared and pulled back because they got scared. I've always been a behavioral economist, but this has never mattered more than it does now. And to see the dissonance out there in terms of how people delineate, they survey the Michigan Consumer Confidence Sentiment Index, Consumer Sentiment Index delineates between Democrats and Republicans. People feel different about the economy based on their party, whether they're Republican or Democrat. That's ridiculous. There's an economy here, and it's got a lot of uneven parts to it, and people should feel differently, but not based on their party affiliation. Mm-hmm. And so, I feel like when I meet with 25 economists from around the world for a week every year, and we download, and they're from 25 different countries. And I feel like now I spend half the time talking about our political environment, and it's like what the developing economists from banana republics used to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's that uncertainty that's injected into it.
Uncertainty is a tax, exactly. Yeah. And so this is a different, the move that we're seeing is not unique to the US. 55 of political parties in the G20 nations, including developed and developing economies, have moved towards more nationalistic tendencies. That means barriers to trade, which matters to companies. That means barriers to immigration and refugees, which matters to companies trying to hire the best and the brightest or the cheapest in labor. All of those things matter out there, and so that's where a major shift has occurred, and it's global in scope. So I think that's where this is.
Do you see a historical antecedent here? Is this evocative of the 30s a little bit in terms of nation states? And I'm not trying to overdraw the analogy, but I think you see where I'm going with that.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is not the first rodeo we've had this way.
Right.
And the reaction to the crisis tends to be populism, whether it's on the left or the right, and it's been more to the right, and that has economic implications as well. And that's what we're seeing. Now, I hope it doesn't mean war. I don't think we're going to get in a hot war with Iran, but or World War III, but we are seeing a major break apart of what was the post-World War II paradigm. And we came together economically to make sure that we wouldn't hurt each other. And now we're breaking apart again. And there's reasons that people got angry with trade. There's reasons that people fall left behind, and it gets back to the first question. We didn't train anyone to be in this economy today. We didn't even educate them. We're still operating off an agricultural system.
Right.
This is ridiculous.
I want you both, from a different perspective, from a national perspective and from a Lansing statewide perspective, to kind of handicap likelihoods of recession next year, this year, in terms of percentages.
Well, I actually had a forecast for a recession if the trade war continued, that we would certainly be in a recession if we kept escalating with China. China's still the 800-pound gorilla in the room because they're slowing. And from 2003 to 2013, they were the largest marginal contributor to growth globally. It's why we saw energy prices go to $100 a barrel, during the 2013 period, because China was demanding so much of it on the margin. Now they're reversing course, and it's having knockoff effects the world over. It's one of the reasons why Germany slowed, in addition to some regulatory issues in their auto industry. Germany, the backbone of the Eurozone in Europe, actually was dragging down growth for the region and flirted with recession, really amazing. So we're in a situation now where I hope we don't have a recession this year, but the risks are still high. I've taken it down from 55%, because I had a recession in 2020, to say 35%, but that's much higher than I'd like it to be, and that's purely because of policy uncertainty. And here we've got businesses that contracted. They stopped spending for 2 quarters last year, and they're pretty much flatlining in the 4th quarter in investment in the U.S. economy. They're not willing to place a bet because they don't know what the rules of the road are going to be going forward. And that is and we've still done remarkably well. That's great that we've done well and sort of powered through that with a little help from the Fed. But at the end of the day, that's, I think, what businesses are seeing relative, and it is a very different situation.
Yeah, I think from the state level, and I'll say this, I'm not an economist like Diane, and not a well-respected economist like Diane. So my perspective is more of what are economists telling me from U of M, MSU, what am I reading from Kiplinger's or others, that says roughly job growth and economic growth will stay flat or decline slightly, potentially in Michigan. I think we had job growth of about 1.4%, about 0.4% this last year, and we had GDP increase by about 1.4% this last year. I think the general consensus has been about that same amount this year. What I will say this year is that from January to November, we saw 100,000 more people working in the state of Michigan. We saw 30,000 new jobs created. We saw the highest number of auto jobs incentivized and created through the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. 6,500 new good-paying jobs coming through FCA, 3,000 coming through Ford, 400 coming through Waymo, so that new mobility technology. So I think there are very much bright spots in the economy, and I do think that we're going to see, those jobs were announced last year. Those jobs are going to start hiring this year. You see others that are going to be announcing, I think, very shortly here. So there will be, I believe, job growth. The question, I think the risks that Diane puts out there are the right ones, though. The uncertainty that we have, certainly in trade, the uncertainty that we have with large economies around the world. And then, I think when the uncertainty that we can't ignore that when trade policy can change via tweet, it injects even that much more instability.
I don't know how many of you have heard of a group called the Eurasia Group, but today they put out an annual study on when they rate global risks. And for the first time, their number one risk globally, with all the stuff going on, is American domestic politics. And he goes on to talk about, and I want to share this with people, it's just out today. The world is now entering a deepening geopolitical recession with a lack of global leadership as a result of American unilateralism, an erosion of U.S.-led alliances, a Russia in decline that wants to undermine the stability and cohesion of both the U.S. and its allies, and an increasingly empowered China under consolidated leadership that's building a competitive alternative on the global stage. I think it's remarkable that, and I heard the author of this morning say that their view is that whatever happens in 2020, their fear is half the country is going to feel that what happened is illegitimate, and that could be a real problem going forward. I'd be interested, this is the melding of the economy and politics.
Unfortunately, it is where we are today. I'm glad I wasn't the killjoy right here.
That's my job.
I know. Well, you're the press, right? So, sorry, they had to do that.
Always count on Daniel House to bring down a room, right?
No, it is really is. They've done economic studies now. One just came out from the University of Chicago on financial analysts, and it turns out their political bias affects how they rate companies, their credit ratings, and they're really bad at it when they mix up their politics with their ratings. And it causes for very bad decision making. And I've seen my whole life people do this where they extend their politics to the economics and they mess it all up. It's why I'll never be a politician, because you guys would get rid of me immediately, because I just, do things for the long term and we'd all be dead. But it really is important right now is how much division we have in this country, how little bipartisanship. I mean, to do the policies we need to do to get where we're going to go and need to go require some kind of bipartisanship. I mean, some kind of agreement, some kind of at least saying hello to each other in the hall. I mean, seeing these candidates, the president, and talking to different parties. I talked to people in both parties, and I think there's several parties within the parties as well. And what strikes me is how little they want to talk to each other now. Nobody wants to talk to each other. And I have some very good friends that are political historians. And the gap started to widen pretty dramatically in 2000 and then got compounded and got much, much worse in the US. But as I said earlier, it's not just a US problem.
Oh, no.
It's a global problem, and there is a void out there. I mean, China is happy to have us not be as multilateral as we once were. TPP, which everybody hates. Does anybody know that TPP was the rest of the world isolating China against, the rest of the world against China?
I know that.
You know that. People don't realize, I'm like, boy, did you guys sell it badly? TPP was a way to use peer pressure to force China to change its ways. Why not that, as opposed to just saying, a tit-for-tat trade war? Mm-hmm. And, we've given up those things. And, I'm not, there's plenty of criticism going around. I used to say you would never know my political party because I'm an equal opportunity offender, because both parties offend me with their economics. And, it's really bad now. We've got populism on the rise, which means you're putting politics over policy. And that's the most simple way to say it, whether it's left or right.
But when you talk about some of the issues in Lansing, education, infrastructure be two great examples. We seem to be kind of stuck in this with the same kind of problems as you just described at a national level. You deal with it at a state level. Yeah. We've seen it in the first year of Governor Whitmer, and we've certainly seen it in the past. The inability to deal with these. I mean, most of the people in this room, you don't know everything about all the problems with the infrastructure, the inability. They've heard about education. They've been at forums. They've been at this. They've seen that report, this report. None of this is a secret.
All right.
And I think a lot of people agree that it's a problem, and it holds you back from being competitive. Yet it persists.
It does, and I think a point that Diane brought up that you're bringing up now is that we haven't focused on systematic issues as a country and as a state, right? How do we solve the systematic issue of K through 12? Not just put a Band-Aid on it by increasing funding in this small pot. How do we solve the systematic issue of infrastructure investment? How do we solve the systematic issue of workforce investment? So that's our approach, and that's the approach that the Department of Labor Economic Opportunity, which I run, is taking. How do we make sure that 10 years from now, that the results of jobs, the results of the economy, where our curve is heading is going to be better because we've intervened in some way. Right. And we've taken an approach that doesn't put all our bets on one thing, but it's a whole bunch of things that together are going to bend the curve upward for us. You know, so when we look at that post-secondary achievement goal, we say today 45% of Michiganders, adults, have a post-secondary degree or a certificate. 10 years from now, that's going to be about 53%. So we've got to bend that curve 7 or 8 points up if we want to hit the 60% goal in 10 years. So that means we have to do a whole bunch of things, right? We have to help people get to college in an easier pathway. We have to make sure that they graduate at higher rates. We have to make sure that there are more apprenticeship opportunities and that people can enroll in those. We also have to make sure that people move back to this state who have education already. So there are a lot of folks out there, right, who've left the state. My brothers were an example. I was an example of my brothers both went to Chicago. We got them to move back, right? I went to Washington, D.C. I moved back. There are peoples, when we go on these trade missions, the governor and I are out in Silicon Valley. You talk to companies like KLA, and KLA is saying right now they put their second headquarters in Ann Arbor, and they actually want to have people, or they have people who tell them, I want to live in Michigan. I can get a bigger house. I can live a better quality of life. You have a lot of expats who come in for Detroit homecoming, who come into homecomings around the state who say, gosh, if there were just the opportunity, I'd move back to the state. We've got to make the case to them as well.
And yet my friends at Bridge Magazine just published a piece saying that the spike in young educated people leaving the state is back. And they cite some statistics.
One of our biggest exports.
Yeah, I'm interested in your take on that. And, we had merely made a lot of progress in the last 5 or 6, 7 years, attracting young people and getting them graduating from our colleges and sticking around and not going to Chicago.
I have a house in Michigan, too. I pay higher taxes than you do, too, with my house in Michigan. So I'm contributing to your pot.
But,
Sand.
But number one, do you agree with that conclusion about what's happening? And what has changed that all of a sudden that's reversing?
So I think we have to look at, and really dig, and I read that article as well, and I think there was no conclusive evidence as to why that trend is changing a bit. It's gotten a lot better, of course, since the Great Recession in the last 20 years, so we should take note of that. But I think one of the things that has been an issue is immigration, too. This, when we look at bringing people to this state, trying to help our population grow, we peaked at 10 million, we've declined a bit, we've started to grow a little bit more, and year over year that growth has shrunk, though. And if you look at starting in 2016, 2017, when our immigration policies started changing, since that time, nationally, I think immigration has fallen off 40-some%. In Michigan, it's been 50%, right? And so we have probably 17,000 to 18,000 less people every year coming to this state. And the immigrants that are coming to this state generally have a higher education level than even the people in the state. So 65-75% of immigrants have some sort of post-secondary degree compared to that 45% that are here today.
With the immigration issue, we've got to come together on some kind of immigration reform. This is really critical. Immigration last year for the country was down more than 40%. And without immigration, if you take all of it away, our labor force will contract.
That's right.
And when you think about what is the potential for an economy to grow, it's how many workers can you add every year, plus how productive are they? That's your potential. And if you're losing your speed of growth of workers, and we've also lost productivity growth, or it's slowing, you don't have a very big potential to grow.
But let's just also be clear. The first priority that we have is to help the people who are here, be able to succeed. But we still need, my family were immigrants. I'm sure a lot of your families were immigrants as well. We have to give people the opportunity to join our economy, to join our state, and become Michiganders and succeed.
Well, isn't this happening as birth rates are declining?
Yes.
As well?
So in 2019, the numbers just came out. It was a decline in birth rates. Millennials deferred, delayed, sometimes reversed the equation on marriage versus kids and the timing. And we also have higher death rates and people dying. And then we have slower immigration. So all three together came together to slow us down to the lowest population growth since 1918 in the U.S. economy. And that was a year of World War I, and it was a year when the influenza was killing everyone. So really pretty stunning abrupt slowdown in population growth. And we don't have the problems. China just fell off a cliff. And 2020 for China, between their one-child policy and delaying childbearing and lower birth rates and aging, they're actually, and they don't have any immigration there. They're falling off a much more dramatic cliff. But this isn't something, we need to have a population growing that's productive, those two things together to support the population that's aging.
But a lot of the Western European countries and Japan are in
They're even worse
the
than
same
us.
boat.
Yeah, absolutely. And Japan's actually trying to increase immigration, which is interesting. That's one of their arrows, although nobody seems to want to come to really go there because you're also treated
Like they're
as a
even giving away homes. In some
Well, yeah,
cities
they're
there.
giving away homes, but you're not treated very well. You don't have the same rights as a Japanese citizen, and there's a lot of racism in Japan. It's not a very integrated society.
For the state of Michigan, I think our demographics would say that without an influx of migration from other states in the country or immigration, 2030 is when we start hitting the decline, right? We have more deaths than births in this state. And so that should be a concern for all of us if we want to have that growing economy, which is very much always linked to population growth.
And productivity.
Yeah.
So
Is
it's,
that
again,
shared?
human capital and
That's right.
automation.
Is that shared by a lot of states? I mean, I've
Yes.
seen recent data.
Unless you're in Arizona or
The
Florida.
out-migration from Illinois, for example, and California is actually outpacing
Yep.
certainly Michigan by
In one of the issues, like, yeah, we can fund anything in Illinois, we just can't pay for it. We got a major problem in Illinois, but 90% of our retirees, one, they don't pay taxes in the state because they leave the state.
Right.
And they also, some of them have multiple pensions, so they live better in their retirement than they did when they were working. And that's written into our Constitution from the 1970s, which is a real issue. But there's two reasons people have left Illinois. One is because retirees have left for lower tax, warmer areas. Need some global warming to get those palm trees on Lake Michigan. But on the other side of it, they're also leaving the inner city and going down south, and it's because of a quality of life issue and crime and among other things. And so it's younger families that are minority families also leaving the state, which is another issue we're struggling with. And we have the same kind of, we have all these wonderful educational institutions just like Michigan does. I mean, to have, I started out as a regional economist when I first graduated University of Michigan. I walked into my first job and they said, you're from Detroit, you must know the auto industry. Well, I had no idea. I've been walking plant floors since I was 2 years old. I did know the auto industry. My father worked for GM, my stepfather worked for Ford, so, my stepfather was a UAW worker, my father was a GM executive. That was interesting dynamics in the family. But it was really, to come from that kind of background and then, have to deal with these issues now. I remember when I wrote my first forecast that I ever made my career on was that Detroit was going to have a renaissance. And it did in the 90s. The 90s were great. It rose like a phoenix out of its own ashes. And the Midwest did too. The Rust Belt became a shiny belt for a period in time. And that was the best forecast I ever did. And ever since I've been writing on it for 30 years. But it's really important because even back then, our biggest export was our educated people. We had these huge concentrations of wonderfully higher educated people, and they were leaving the region for the coast. And that's still going on to some extent, and that's what you're struggling with, and that's a real issue.
But it's certainly more problematic. Diane, Jeff, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, panelists. And now it's my turn to share some of the questions that have come in from the audience today. And so first, this comes from some of the students that we have in the audience. In 1950, Detroit had a population of 1.8 million. Today it has roughly 600,000. Jeff, if you could maybe comment in terms of what are some strategies that you have seen either working effectively here in Detroit or in other large cities to help bring people back?
Yeah, I think we were talking with the students earlier too about Detroit and just the situation right there. Are fewer jobs in the city of Detroit than other major cities. So there are 3 residents in Detroit for every job. In Atlanta, it's 2 to 3 jobs for every resident. So I think one of the first things is making sure that we have more jobs in the city. Because right now, most of the jobs in the city are actually held by suburbanites commuting in every day. 64% of Detroiters commute out. And so we can create more of the jobs that are accessible to Detroit that allow for those pathways into middle class, upper middle class livelihoods like the ones that FCA created, right? The 5,000 jobs that are coming to the city, with a very unique, I think, situation where workforce and economic development came together, not just to incentivize the project to make sure that you had the first, I think, plant in a generation locate in Michigan and in the city of Detroit, but actually have Detroiters get the first shot at the jobs. So that if the city of Detroit, if workforce funding from the state came together, trained those individuals, screened them, made sure that they met every requirement of FCA, they would be the first persons to be considered for the job, to get interviews, and potentially get hired. I know there are a few thousand jobs being interviewed for right now as we speak, and there are probably between 3,000 and 4,000 Detroiters who passed all those requirements and are now hoping to get those jobs. So we're going to see how that works, but that's part of the situation, is make sure that there are jobs in the city, that people in the city can have good livelihoods, and then we have to fix the schools, quite frankly, right? And I think the K-12 system in Detroit has made tremendous strides. DPSCD and Dr. Vitti and the school board have done really phenomenal work. They've, working with them, we've invested $30 million into career technical education to revitalize that as an option here in the city. We worked with a lot of the companies in the room. Dr. Vitti is making, I think, great strides in working through and building educational excellence and foundations there. But he still, back to this K-12 question of funding, he still has an $85 million gap between what he can pay his employees, his teachers, and what the suburbs pay. He still has $400 to $500 million worth of infrastructure gap that he can't fill because there's an aging infrastructure in the city of Detroit and he's not able to bond for. That's going to balloon to $1.5 billion very soon. So we have to address those systematic issues. We have to go after education. We have to make sure there are good jobs, and that's going to help the city of Detroit continue to come back.
Thank you. Diane, the next question's for you. There's a great amount written about federal debt levels. How do you judge state and municipal debt burdens? And are there any liquidity worries or capital market issues at the local levels?
I'm from Chicago, come on. There's a lot of debt worries at the state and local level. Actually, it is something that I'm very concerned about because we're starting to move into a period, and it gets to the immigration issues and the aging issues, where pensions, even in states that have pretty good financials, as opposed to the state I'm in, which is trying to improve its financials, but it's got a long way to go. The pension obligations that are coming up are fairly significant. And we've had a massive move to buy municipal debt, and that's been great, but there is some question about the sustainability of many of the liquidity issues, given the massive amount of baby boomers moving into retirement. And that's something that just doesn't get enough attention. Social Security isn't really hard to fix. I remember actually Ned Gramlich, who used to be at University of Michigan, and Alan Greenspan were on the first, together, they're on the first Social Security Commission. The first crisis in Social Security was 1982. And I remember Alan Greenspan talking about it and said, you can solve Social Security in about 5 minutes with 4 people in a room, and even economists agreeing on it. But once you get into the political sphere, he wasn't even allowed to say that Social Security was an entitlement. I mean, Social Security is a pay-as-you-go system, so everyone who's paying in now is paying for the people who are pulling money out, and so as less people pay in, there's less to pull out. And to not understand that, and it became a middle-class entitlement where people just didn't want their parents living with them, and I can certainly relate to that. I'm an only child, and I was glad to be close, but not in the same house as my parents. And that has really become a real issue. We're not willing to tackle these tough issues. So on the municipal side and state and local side, I think there's a lot more problems out there than we're actually seeing because of the pension problem. You see them in states like Illinois and New Jersey because they're just so obvious and so bad. But believe me, the demographics, as you're already talking about, they're not unique to us.
Great, thank you. Jeff, have we diversified enough from automotive to lessen the blow of the next recession?
So we are still very exposed to, I think, recession. I think the demographics would put us as the second most exposed state. Indiana is the first. And so, yes, we have work to do to continue to build out both, I think, the new mobility sector. So we're making sure that our automotive sector, our manufacturing jobs become the most competitive, the most productive here in the state so that they can continue to have investment and job creation. but then move into those new spaces, particularly IT, technology companies, those service industries that are taking up more of the economy elsewhere, which we've lagged behind on a bit. So I do think that there's work to be done, and I think what you're going to see from us in the next year or two through MEDC, through workforce development, is making sure that we have that systematic approach of how to do it.
Okay, great. And Diane, we have seen negative interest rates in certain parts of the world. Can you comment, first of all, maybe a discussion on negative interest rates, and what is the likelihood we might see those in the U.S. in the next 5 years?
Well, first of all, if we hit a recession and we're at zero, all bets are off. The Federal Reserve, I advise the Fed, and I know Jay Powell, I know all the former Fed chairmen since Alan Greenspan, and I knew Paul Volcker, he just passed, that was very sad. The Fed has backed off of negative interest rates. As a central bank, Ben Bernanke really believes zero was the lower bound. And actually they went to 0.13, 0.125, if you want to be explicit on the short-term interest rates. They never even went to zero, but they really believed that was the bound. During the height of the crisis, the Taylor rule, which was once used as a rule of thumb to set monetary policy, suggested we needed negative 4.75% to clear the economy in the wake of the 2008 crisis. Negative 4.75%. Now, our Fed didn't do that. There was a big discussion, and Ben Bernanke has now advocated after on Sunday, he was at a meeting in San Diego of the American Economic Association, which he's the outgoing president of, and he advocated at that meeting for the U.S. to think about negative interest rates after he wouldn't go there when he was Fed chairman. And the reason that it's coming up is, what happened in the U.S. was all of a sudden we got to zero interest rates, and then fiscal policy got contractionary instead of expansionary. We had the sequester. We had the 2010 election, and all of a sudden people cared about the deficit and austerity. This happened in Europe as well. And they started cutting back on fiscal stimulus, which was more powerful. And the Fed was against a wall, so they started expanding their balance sheet to try to, literally drop money from the sky. It got stuck in the trees and didn't all make it down. They call it helicopter money. But in a crisis, all bets are off. And although this Fed has backtracked on negative interest rates after saying they're on the docket, if we get to the zero bound and the economy is in recession and there's not enough fiscal stimulus, the Fed will have to do something, and negative interest rates are on the table. Okay. And it's one of those things I need to add this too. I deal with a lot of, I feel like I'm the bridge between academia and the real world, and these academic economists will give you these models, and they say, theoretically, it's so good. Yes, theoretically, negative 4.75% interest rates would have cleared the economy. In reality, it also destroyed all bank balance sheets.
I was going to say, at whose cost?
Exactly, and would we then bail out the banks, as they, which is what bit of what's going on in Europe. So there's a debate in Europe where in Denmark negative interest rates haven't had a big negative impact. In Germany, they're so strange that they save more as interest rates go negative. Who knows? They're Germans. I'm part German. I've got so many nationalities in me, I can insult just about anybody. Although I haven't done a DNA test. My mother tells me she has Neanderthal from her DNA test, which I think probably fits. But anyways, I think it really is important to understand these negative interest rates we've played with in the global economy are very little negative. Some of these people that are, I've been in these meetings where economists are saying, negative 4 or 5%, that's no big deal. And I'm like, have you ever worked in the real world whatsoever? No, they haven't. They're wonderful, incredibly brilliant people, but everything is in theory. And so, luckily the Fed listens to all of us. And there's, when I used to be in banking, I'd be one of the first ones with my hand up saying, wait a minute here, But there are people pushing back on that, but, when push comes to shove, all bets are off.
Okay, now we're going to shift to the lightning round, where we have some questions, just quick responses. First, if I could start with the last book that you each read.
So I'll say the books I'm reading right now are AI Superpower, and then Startup Nation, which I just traveled to Israel, and I'm reading that book.
So I just finished 2 books. One was Narrative Economics by Bob Schiller, who's a behavioral economist who won a Nobel laureate and went to University of Michigan. He's now at Yale, and it's about how stories can go viral and affect the economy in a major way. And I find that fascinating, especially in the world we live in, with the things that aren't even rooted in reality can affect the economy. which I think we walked through the looking glass a long time ago once we had this crisis. The other one is how democracies die, so I guess that gets back to what we were talking about, but I decided I had to put that down. It's a really short book, and it's really good, and it's really, really, really depressing.
How about a person that you would like to have lunch with, other than a family member?
So about a year ago, I was supposed to have dinner with John Dingell, but he passed away the night before. So I think I'd like to have one more lunch with Mr. Dingell, if I could.
You know, I thought about this a long time, and again, it's somebody that's passed, because I've had lunch with a lot of really interesting people, and I've really been blessed in my life, coming from where I did to get to do the things I do. But boy, I'd really like to meet Eleanor Roosevelt. I think she's a really interesting person. Didn't agree with her all the time, but boy, she did some really independent things. So she's someone that I would like to just sit down and have a chat with.
How about pizza, Chicago style or Detroit style?
I have gotten into Chicago style. I've been there more than half my life now. So, although my roots are here, and I do pay taxes here. I'm going to keep saying that. More taxes than other people because it's a vacation house. So.
Well, Buddy's just opened across the street from my apartment, so Detroit.
Okay. And then finally, how about advice to your 25-year-old self?
I thought about this a long time. It's a hard answer. One, slow down. I had 3 degrees by the time I was 25 years old, and that was kind of crazy. I was also married and then unmarried. Practice makes perfect. Married my first boyfriend. The other thing that I really wish I had known back then is how much I had to appreciate all the people who went before me to give me the opportunities I had. Being a woman in particular, being a mother. I did live TV 4 weeks after I delivered my daughter. Had to bind myself so I wouldn't leak out on live national TV. I worked through 2 maternity leaves. My son almost died 7 times. And I wish I had appreciated the freedoms I had, and sometimes I wish I had taken it a little slower. Of course, I was their sole support for some time too, because one of the other husbands wasn't as good at that either. And finally, I met my husband, my only husband, my last one. So 3rd time's a charm, and 3 strikes you're out, so I'm stuck now. But I would have told myself to pace myself a little better for this marathon in life.
I think I would tell myself, take time to appreciate family and friends. Make sure that you're building in time. And then take time to pause and really just enjoy the journey. Make sure you realize the journey you're on and that it's not necessarily just about the destination of the next degree, the next job, the next success, but that you're kind of shoulder to shoulder with some really good people working together, and you don't often aren't able to capture that again, put lightning in a bottle. So I think that's what I would tell myself.
Daniel, Jeff, and Diane, thank you for sharing your time with us today. Thank you.
Next time, remind me to get a presiding officer about a foot shorter, if you don't mind. Thank you. So one quick announcement before we adjourn. If you loved today's program and want to experience again, you've got 3 ways to do it. Tomorrow at this time, you can download the audio podcast, wherever you download your podcast on your phone. You can watch the program in its entirety on DEC's or Detroit Public TV's website. If you are an Xfinity customer, you'll be able to see it on demand in the Get Local channel. So let me add my thanks. Diane and Jeff, thank you for sharing your thought leadership, and especially Diane, I know you got up really early from Evanston, Illinois to be with us. So thank you so much. Daniel Howes and Jim Tisch, thank you for being an important part of today's program and for your talents and your time. How about one more round of applause for all of our participants?
No place like home.
And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming on time, every time. This meeting of the Detroit Economic Club is now adjourned. Thank you.